Now, maybe we got it this time. Finally. Okay. I think we finally got it figured out. Maybe. We got some rough turn bowls to do. That was my fearless 89-year-old wood guy called me the other day and said, I got some stuff for you. Little did I know that he had a truckload and a half of walnut for me. A little more than what I really need to have at one time, but it is what it is. So I cut a little chunk off. This has got to be the kind of the most interesting or different walnut than I've ever had. Black walnut is generally black, as the name would suggest. It looks like we can go about 9 inches. Where this stuff, and according to him, it is because the tree is a young tree, for one. And the other thing is that he says where they're growing at, they're not growing in the woods, they're growing more out in the open. So they don't necessarily, even though it's black walnut, they're not actually very black, which you'll see here in a couple of minutes. I don't even have them cut. I just cut them with a chainsaw. So I got to do a little bandsaw work first. Cut the corners off. I still haven't changed my bandsaw blade. It still has a 5/8 inch blade on, so I can't make a very tight radius. Or it'll bind the blade up quite quickly. Although at 9 inches in diameter, it's not done too bad. I don't have a camera to be able to show you what we're doing, but not real exciting. I just take the cardboard, and that's all this is a piece of chipboard, I think that is. Oh, that's actually a piece of mat board, picture frame mat board. And then we will take and I actually have a circle cutting jig for cutting mats. So they're pretty much gives you a nice circle. Not that it really has to be a fancy kind of a circle, but gives you a nice circle nonetheless. And they're sort of disposable, I guess you would consider it. I would consider it. Rather than, a lot of people make these out of wood. And I'm like, first off, that's a lot more work to get a nice circle out of wood. And as you can see by the looks of it, I hit it quite often with the blade. this walnut here actually has more white in than any of the walnuts that I've ever really encountered. But there again, I got educated on why, but there's some, this piece, when you look at it from the end, it only has a tiny little bit of black in here. Now he says some of this other stuff, once it dries, the black will leach up into this, but it will remain a lot of white, which is kind of different. But we'll see. It is green. I don't know if this tree was alive when they took it down or not. He didn't tell me that part. It's not super big. Like I say, we're going to get a 9-inch blank out of it. And it's only about maybe 4.5, 5 maybe. As far as thickness goes. And might as well take that back a little bit because I'll need it later. So there, it's on. And then we'll adjust from there. We probably don't need the super long tool rest, so we'll just start out a little bit smaller. And then we can set our height, or set our 2 high point wings so that they're even, or as close to even as I can get them. We'll make this round, and then we'll check on the low point wings. See whether we got, yeah, we're like right on the money there. So I guess the next question is, do we have a sharp tool? Probably not. This is the Sorby one. So first order of business, let's go put an edge on this one. And do we have our grinder set up? Yes. So go over while we're grinding. I think the other ones are actually sharp. I've been working on a different, yeah, they're sharp. But I'm trying to use this, I'm trying to get this Sorby one used up so that I can have the round bar to make a small round bar skew out of it is what my intent is. We'll just use our 2-inch setback, slide things up, try and get it lined up straight down the middle. Because there again, this one is getting back far enough that it's almost beyond the wings. This has a V-notch in, so it will grip something round without a problem. But obviously, I didn't get it very well centered. Something's not very well centered. Because when I touch it to the grinding wheel, I could see that it's wanted to grind more. Right off the bat, it was grinding again. Once again, it's sort of grinding a different angle than what it was. Let's try that once. Still a little bit different than what it was, but it'll just take a little bit more material off. Like I said, I want to get this used up anyhow, so I'm not really too concerned that I'm sort of wasting some steel away. That's good. Oops. Yeah, leave the tool and bring the jig back. That doesn't make sense. We need the tool. So let's go back to here. Can also bring things in a little closer. Won't be quite centered, but it should be okay. Face shield, definitely a must with this kind of work. clean off some dust. Really could use wash, but it's going to get splattered up some more. And if I remember right, I was doing actually I'll show you a little bit later. I was working on another black locust bowl this week. It's actually dry wood, so I was able to work on something like that. Helps if it goes in forward because I was sanding. There's water coming off of that. You feel a spray of water is coming off and hitting you. So this will actually cut really nice. Sort of lubricates the cut, makes it cut like butter versus dry wood. And we're pushing a little bit too hard on it because we're bouncing, so it means we're trying to hurry and not being as nice as what you could be. We're not quite there yet. It'll probably take 2 or 3 cuts to get it round. So if I progress at the right speed, then I will have no bounce because I'm not trying to force it. So we should be round on the long points. Yep. Now we can check our low points and see whether we're way out of whack, which we are. So this is the shorter side, the longer side. I need the shorter side to come up. This is why I don't use a point on the live center. This makes this process a whole lot easier to maneuver. Because if I had a point there and only wanted to move over just a little bit, then the point automatically wants to go back in the same hole. And I should have moved the tool rest a little closer. Give everything a spin and make sure that nothing's going to hit. As you can see, we're really making this wonky at the bottom. That's okay. We will clean that up. We also got it a little bit more in balance, so we'll be able to pick up a little bit more speed, be able to move a little bit faster. And a little deep on the cut, so we'll just back off and start a new one. Now, I'm also starting to taper it down a little bit. No point in going straight across right there. We're pretty close. Move over just a little bit more at this Trying to get it to move just that little bit can be challenging. At this point, I'm not going to worry about retruing this up again because we'll just clean it up when we do the bottom, which is where we're going to next. Rare earth magnets are nice, but they do too good of a job sometimes. So we'll get this, find where our high point is. We'll get this relatively close so that we can clean off some of this down here. So now we're flat. It's probably a little bit long. It's about 4 inches. We're probably down to, started out at 9, we're probably down closer to 8. And so that even says 7.5. So that makes this a little bit too long or too deep. So we'll take a little bit of it out because I want a nice curve to it. But we have to put a tenon in there and all that good stuff. And then we can just lose some of the material that way. Just trying to think which jaws. I think I have these set for the big jaws, so I think that's where we'll go next. And we can switch over so you can see twofold what's going on. There. So we'll scribe with the left leg and match up with the right leg. Oh. This will be a natural edge bowl. This is green wood. In other words, it's wet. It's just cut sometime probably earlier this week. I just got it today, but it's wet. That's why you can sort of see some differences in color. Like right in here is a little bit drier than that is up there. This is the way I do probably 95% or more of the bowls. I'll twice turn them. I'll turn them while they're wet. Because this way, if I was to let this dry as like a half a log, that would have to be, there again, I have to leave another 3 inches or 4 inches on each end, which is going to become waste because it's going to crack. You're going to get some checking and stuff like that coming in from the end. This way this was just cut off of a log, so this way I can actually cut it to the size I need right off the bat. And then rough turn it, and I'll put it in a paper bag for about a year, 8 months to a year. And then I can come back and return it and make it back into basically make it back into a bowl. Make it back into something round, because it will distort quite a bit in that time frame. Now we'll get rid of the corner. And it's also very nice to turn. A lot of people don't like to mess with wet wood, but as you can see, it turns really easy. I'm getting wet. My arm is getting very wet. It's also why there's shower curtains behind me, because that water would fly halfway across the shop. And I don't want it landing on the table saw or any such thing as that. Now we can sort of start shaping a little bit. I'm still really getting rid of the corner for the most part. Then eventually we're going to go in here and, but we won't move. One of the things with doing natural edge stuff, it's never really a good practice anyhow on any of it, is to move the tool rest while the thing's running. First off, you can get your fingers in there, you can hit the piece, and it's just better to take the 60 seconds or whatever it takes to stop, to let the lathe stop and go from there. So we need a tenon, and then we'll leave a little extra to go with that. First we'll get down to where our tenon's at. And we've also got it to the point where it's pretty much in balance, even though you look at something like this and say, well, how can you get a round piece of wood or a piece of natural edge, especially when I have 2 points up here, 2 points down here? Well, if you join from the beginning, I take the time to make these 2 points, the high points be the same, the 2 low points be pretty close to the same. That way this thing is actually balanced. So it allows me to spin it a little bit faster and makes the turning part a whole lot easier. Now we'll make our tenon. We're going to leave a pretty big tenon on it. The tenon on something like this probably will become the foot eventually. A simple parting tool. I don't need it to be real deep. That's about 1/4 of an inch deep. Could possibly go just a hair deeper on that one. I don't need a big flat shoulder in there either. Just a little bit for the chuck the register on. I know some people that say you don't need that at all for the chuck to register onto. Still looks like we need to lose a little bit of the depth. What I'm looking for is I want a nice sweeping curve, point A to point B, knowing full well this area down here is going to be the foot eventually. Either right here or right there, either one. I try and leave myself as many options as what I possibly can. So I'm going to go another 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch up there. And then we'll start making our shape. I primarily don't want to take as little as possible off towards the top here. I'm going to take just a little bit more off. Also looks a little bit too much of an abrupt curve for my liking. The other thing, that way I'm not making most of my cuts to make this round. When I started out, I made all the cuts from the bark down in order not to try and pull the bark off. This bark here is actually very solid. That doesn't mean it's going to stay there as it dries by any means. It's still looks a little fat to me because we were at 7.5. That's still 4. We're over the 50% mark. So we're going to take some more off. We'll probably take more of the tenon off and redo that again. Yes. I mean, I cut up across there, but the bark, I'll leave this probably about an inch thick, because as this dries, the bark will shrink more than the wood, usually. The bark never, put it this way, the bark never shrinks at the same rate that the wood will. So you need to leave a little bit more material for the second turning. I do some of these. I've done some of these. This one's probably way too wet to do that too. I do some of these that'll actually take right to final thickness, right from the start. I've done it that way. It just makes it a little bit more challenging to sand. It's not impossible. It's a different type of sanding because it won't be round, as you can very well imagine. I think that looks better. There's another simple thing that we can look at. We can take a simple hot melt glue stick, which is really a good friend to have in wood turning, because for me to stand here, I'm standing here looking against this. There's a wall in front of me, so I can say, okay, well, does that shape look right? But it really doesn't necessarily show you the shape. So if I take the hot melt glue stick, hold it from point A down at the bottom and one point at the top, it's going to show me more of what the shape actually looks like to your eye anyhow. And it will also show me that there's a hump here. And really just only one hump. There's just one hump right there. I can see that. I can feel it. As a rough turn bowl, do I need to worry about that hump? Well, practice makes perfect is what I've been taught from day one. You don't, even though you're doing a rough turn bowl, do it and practice on it, so to speak, and make it right from the start. I just switched over to a gouge sharp because that one is actually, that's the problem with using, like I say, that's an old Sorby, and I'm not going to knock somebody's tools, but they do not stay sharp as long as my Thompson tools. That's just the nature of the beast, I guess you would say. I'm going to make another cut. I'll make this in a fairly small cut. Not that it matters the amount of material that I'm removing, it's the sharpness of the tool. Now also slow down a little bit, and we'll fade out at the top. And then we can go back, once it stops, we can go back with there's still a little tiny hump right there, but that's reasonable enough, certainly. This piece down here that I've left, that can also be the foot. I can make this into a bead. It might be a little wide for a bead, but I don't need to worry about that at this point. I do need to, I need to make this tenon longer up into here somewhere, because I don't want to leave this extra mass down here, because if I leave this an inch thick up here, I could make the bottom thinner to sort of match that, because the bottom of a bowl has the least amount of movement to it. The most amount of movement will be on the higher sides, and the end grain, which that's the end grain on either end. That's where the wood doesn't move. Wood does not move when you dry it lengthwise. Very minimal lengthwise. It's always going to move from the outside in towards the center. Whether it's lumber or whether it's turning stock, it all moves in the same direction. If you do any woodworking, you can understand that, where you get some boards that really decide to cup or whatever. A lot of that depends on the grain direction and things of that nature as well, but that is the direction that the wood will move. I'll go back to my parting tool, like I said, which is grounded at an angle to match the dovetail jaws. So we'll bring that down a little bit more. And now it's too fat going in that direction for the jaws because they would bottom out, which we do not want that. Move the tool rest back down. So we'll just trim some of that off. Now we're happy with the outside shape. So I'm going to go the whole way in to the very bottom, right up against the live center. And I can leave, generally speaking, I can leave that little nub on there. I could actually cut it off, chisel it off, even at this point, because I don't really need that, but it should fit in between the chuck jaws. If it don't, we'll take it off. Did not do a very good job of my parting tool. This looks to me like it does not have no dovetail shape to it. So I'm going to use my 3/8 spindle gouge, and I'll make the dovetail shape with that. Get right into the corner. Make sure this face is clean and a little bit concave towards that corner. You can also knock that sharp corner off right there, that sharp corner off right there. When they're wet, I try and knock off as much of the really sharp corners, especially like that, because as this dries, that tiny little corner that's actually sharp to your fingers is the first place it dries. So that's the first place it's going to try and crack, or will crack. So once again, not a good place for it to crack. Not that you can't fix things after the fact. It's just I've managed to maybe get smarter over the years on doing some of that stuff, and it's also why the tendon is bigger. It may not, the foot may not be that big when we're done, because the foot really needs to be about a third of the diameter, which a third of 7 would only be like 2 3/8, 2.5, which is probably a little bit small for it. Would make it decorative, but I try and make a lot more stuff more functional than decorative. It's a Vic Mark chuck. That is their, what do they call them? 3 3/8 or something like that jaws. So it's fairly big. It will hold a very good sized piece of wood. We'll see whether we got it right. I'm running the grain up and down with the chuck in between the jaws. So this is the end grain, so the grain is running up towards me. It's going to give me the best grip all the way, most consistent grip all the way around it, because it's gripping pretty much all the same type of grain. Now we can clean out the inside. Once again, we're going to put our tool rest relatively close. I don't want it needs to be far enough away so that that bevel can't slide down it. Because if it slides down, then that's when some really exciting things happen. I should say less than exciting things. So we changed something. I'll slow the speed way down. And I forget that the one I was working on the other day, I have this down on the low speed, or the power belt. So there we have virtually no vibration, which is what we're looking for. I don't want it to vibrate. I will bounce back and forth between two different bowl gouges, one of which has the 40 degrees, the 40-40 grind, as well as the swept back grind. To do what I'm doing right now, I'm actually using the 40-degree one. It does work really well for this because it's going to allow me to dig out a cone right here in the middle to give me some room to work. I won't go the whole way down for sure. I want to keep as much of the middle as I can. That gives me more support on the outside edges. So once again, it's now in balance, so I can bring the speed up a little bit more. Got a little bit of a tough spot to go through right there for some reason. It might have been something that already has knocked the edge off of the tool, which is a good idea. Yeah. And I have to push on it. Install. Let's see, do I have the other one? I actually have multiple ones. Different ages of them. Generally speaking, what is dulling the tool right here is the dirt and debris that's stuck in the bark. So now we can set a divider. The big one, yeah, it's the bigger one. So I'll literally set this with the ruler, and we'll set it for about 1 inch to 1.125 inches. We'll go to the 1.125 to start. We're probably actually getting fairly close to that now. Yeah, we got about one more little cut, and then we'll start measuring this because I want this to be as absolute consistent as possible down through there. Once again, it gives it a better chance to dry evenly. Is what I found. I'm also standing with my right hip basically up against the lathe so that I can look with my left eye on this side, the right eye on this side, and I can literally see it. The camera might pick it up. It doesn't always pick it up, but you can literally, you're looking through the air spaces to see the tool, what it's doing. And I don't need, we're doing good tonight on that. What I do is I leave that fat, so we made it 1.125 inches. So I am about 1/16 or a little better away from the outside of that to make sure that we're consistent. And like I say, we're doing a good job tonight. I haven't done many bowls here lately. So if we want to, we can move our tool rest in a little bit. It doesn't necessarily help us. It'll help us in certain places, but the majority of it on the outside it won't. We're going to inspect our cut too while we're at it, even though it's rough turn or green. I want to make sure I don't have that I'm not tearing things to pieces. You can see what the 40/40 gouge does not like to do. It does not like to go in end grain. So this part here is all chipped out and carried on, which doesn't matter because it's in waste wood, but a lot of people are real advocates of the 40/40 grind. I like it for certain things, but if it's somebody that's new to turning and doesn't have a big budget to be buying a whole bunch of tools, it's not necessarily the gouge, the grind to use, because it's not going to allow me to do the bottom of the bowl. I'd have to switch to a different gouge to do the bottom. So if you only had the budget to buy one, then that's not necessarily the one to buy. And I have to watch because this is actually the shorter one, and as you can see, my finger and hand is getting much, much closer to the bark that's coming around. Sometimes you can roll the tool over on its side and come back here, because what happens with a natural edge, or anything with any kind of a rim like that, the chips want to stay right where they're right at the top of the rim. And when they're wet, things stick to the tool too. So I went down another 1.25 inches maybe. And then we're gonna just keep stopping and measuring. I'm really interested in where I start to curve as I move my calipers around. It doesn't become tight right there. So I can take a little bit more out depth wise, and we'll take the middle part out as well. Because like I said, the bottom of this can be a little bit thinner. Definitely from down in here, the whole way through there, or at least down in there. It can be a little thinner. It can actually go down closer to that line because we have all that material below it that's going to has to dry as well. Right there is where the 40/40 does not like it. So you can, like I say, if you have the budget and whatnot, you can actually pick up a bottom, sort of a bottom bowl gouge and clean up the rest of the bottom. Or you can use the swept back grind. We'll do the same thing down there. But I want a continuous curve. I don't want the bottom to be flat. I don't want to leave a hole in the bottom, like I think I just did. And you can see the little bit that's still hanging right there. That didn't tear it out, but it's lucky it didn't. I don't want to push through the bottom, through the center and the bottom, and create a divot down there, because that's, at this point it wouldn't hurt me, but you just try and work on not doing that. That way, whenever you get to the finishing part of something like this, that's about right. Now we can check. Our fingers tell us everything. Look the other way and take your fingers and run them to the bottom, and right in that area right there, there's kind of like it come down, it went flat across, and then dip down again. So I do want to address that a little bit, just because I'm fussy. But once again, this is all practice for your finished piece. That's one of the things I was taught from early on. every cut is the cut for that you should be making on a finished piece. So I'm going to pick the cut up back up in here, and I'm going to sweep through that. And to be a little bit careful. This is also a very blunt angle on this, so that I don't have to swing the tool way around to stay on the bevel to go through the center. Because if I swing too far, then I hit the bark. Or worst case scenario, I would actually maybe hit my hand on the bark. The real problem with this type of a grind is that the chips don't always, because this one here is, when you do that type of grind, it's a little bit different to use because the flute is pretty much straight up and down open. I'm actually cutting on the left side, so that as the wood comes down across it, it's being sliced rather than trying to cut it off on the swept back grind gouge. You can actually do the same thing with the swept back grind gouge. I've seen it done. I don't do it because you're about a half a degree, because you could use a swept back grind bowl gouge too, flute open and actually cut on this left side. But you're about a half a degree from sudden death. Because when this becomes unsupported, the bevel comes away from the piece in that direction, it's going to flip it over. I don't care how big and strong you think you are, you have no match for it. So, and that was a David Ellsworth, if you know anything about wood turning, that was talking about doing it that way. And he also made that very statement that you're a half a degree away from tragedy. Because when it catches down there, it's going to be a catch, a very good catch. So I think this one actually is done. As you can see, it's quite quick to do it this way. So yeah, our bottom down there in that bowl is down inside of this foot right now, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with that, because we still have this part of the foot plus the tenon. So once this dries and I come back, I still have plenty of room down there. And like I say, the center will not move as much. So we don't need to worry about this. And as you can see, I didn't show you that part. The chuck was closed about that, so that's actually smaller in diameter. So that little nub was actually going in that opening in the chuck. My father would be yelling at me. Did you see that? He's watching. I saw he was on here. Don't leave the chuck key in the chuck. Bad thing to do. Because you bump the on switch and you got a chuck key that's becoming a missile going across the room. And you say, well, it'll never happen to me, but I was at a demonstration by Jimmy Clues, no less. And, you know, in his case, his defense, I guess you would say, you know, it's a different lathe than what he would normally use. And he was fumbling around with something or other. Chuck key was in there. He went over to hit the spindle lock. Instead of hitting the spindle lock, he actually hit the on switch. And through that chuck, it only spun maybe one revolution before the chuck key come out and went across the room. And it went probably halfway across the room and hit somebody. Scared the crap out of him, because that's the last thing you want to do. So from here, what I do, I write on here what it is, the date. This will go in a paper bag, paper grocery bag. I will fold that paper grocery bag up, tape it shut. I'll write on the tape as well as to what it is, that it's a natural wedge walnut bowl, even though the only walnut inside is totally white. We only have this little bit of black on the outside. It's not really kind of what I was thinking that they should be, but it's what he brought me, or what he actually brought me, because he already had his truck loaded. These logs are 5 feet long, thereabouts, and I don't think this is the biggest diameter. I don't think this is, it was actually come out of 2 different trees, he said. And we have 2 of the big ones to do the bigger ones. I brought a limb up with the smaller one. This one's going to cause some aggravation because it has a piece that's split off on the side. So we're probably going to have to deal with that a little bit. Because eventually, somewhere along the line, I'm going to cut this off and that piece becomes a projectile too. I also didn't do a real good job cutting the pith out of it, which right there is the center of the tree. I was just kind of being in a hurry and being lazy. Normally I want to cut. When I cut this as a full log, I'm going to mark where the pith is at on both ends. I'm going to come over anywhere from, depending on the size of the log, anywhere from a ½ inch to an inch on either side of the pith, because the pith may not go straight through. As you can see on this side, it's considerably different. I'm not a metric guy, so it's about a ½ inch from the edge on that side, and we're only about a ¼ inch from that side. So it almost never goes straight through. But in order for this to dry properly, that has to be going, because this wood shrinks to that center point by, according to the so-called experts or what have you, by about 10%. So that's another scenario of years of practice and years of going to demonstrations and people talking about different things, and you try and remember as many of the different things. Or if you're really studious, you would write some of that stuff down. I'm not that studious. So we're going to try and, this one here is not very, it's not very uniformly round, for one. But I know we got to get rid of that on that side. I'm going to shift it over that way a little bit. And it's free wood. This is, you know, it cost me time and fuel to go get this, but other than that, it didn't do any different. Liberation? Okay. Thank you for the follow. I can't say that I can pronounce your name very well. I will have my back turned towards you because the bandsaw is behind me. Ooh, stink bug. Why are they here? Must have been on that one of them pieces of wood. We haven't had much of an issue with stink bugs, at least yet. Tool rest to spin sideways. Good thing to whack your arm on. I'll get that out of the road. So what I'm going to do, my first cut is going to be pretty much straight across here to get rid of this end. This end is the exposed end of this log. There is a bunch of little grain checks right here. So definitely they got to go. And then we'll basically I'll just cut the corners off. And then we'll be back on the lathe doing the lathe thing. Make sure the bandsaw blade guides are high enough. The bandsaw is probably one of the more dangerous tools in your shop, woodworking tools. You know, most people would disagree with that. That's what I was taught from a very young lad, your very young age. Because the bottom line is, I'm watching where it's cutting and not necessarily watching where my fingers are at. So it can be very dangerous, especially doing this kind of work. It's big, it's you know, it's relatively heavy. So now we have our center point. We know that because we drove a nail in there. And that's all I use. It just has a nail through there. It's gotten elongated over the year. You can see that places where I wasn't paying attention cut into it. You know, it's just a piece of cardboard. When they get boogered up too bad, you just make new ones. It's just simple picture frame mat board. Go to Hobby Lobby or one of them places. Other things you can use. The bark is wet. So there you go. What I want to do is get through the cambium layer, which would be this entire layer right here, get into solid wood. Otherwise, my drive center does not have anything to hold on to. And if you watch enough people on YouTube and such places as that, I just saw one yesterday or today, was looking at some different stuff. And they want to put these, trying to think who makes them. It's one of the people across the pond, I think, that make them. I think Nova actually has one too. They make a faceplate ring that you can expand the chuck jaws out into that ring rather than doing it other ways. I see those people put those faceplate rings, or even a faceplate, onto this piece. Well, in my opinion, first off, it's not safe unless you're using really, really long screws, because if you're not getting through the bark and the cambium layer into solid wood, you don't have a very good grip on it. And when you do it with a faceplate or something like that, now we have no adjustability to it. We're sort of locked into wherever you put the faceplate, which, as you're going to see, I move it a lot. There's our piece that broke. Oh, good. The whole thing came off. That's what we wanted. NEMA beater. Put it down on the concrete floor. And I'll drive it in. I'm driving it in with a homemade mallet. This is a piece of black locust, which is very, very hard. This thing is quite a few years old. It could use a little touch up. I could mark the centers and put it back between centers, which I should do one of these days, because these little shards that are sticking out are pretty sharp. But someday I'll decide to take the 10 minutes out or whatever to do that. But it's one of them deals where it's me that's going to get one of them things stuck in my hand. So we'll start between centers. And I'm not holding on to it very much while I can let go of it. That's how far I've driven them jaws in. I just bring up a little bit of pressure just to hold it. There's our nightmare piece that I thought may fly. And anything that's loose, you need to get rid of. It can hurt. It can hurt. It'll scare the crap out of you when it hits you, even though it hits in the face shield. I knew that all too well. I'm trying to think what I was doing. I switched runs at work, so I'm actually able to come down here and play or do a little work, whichever you may consider it. My wife would consider it play. At night, in the evening, because I now have a daytime run, and I'm a truck driver by trade. And we really can't do anything with the low point. Although I can, no, we won't do anything with that. So there's our tool rest set. Make sure we have plenty of pressure. Like I say, we know we're going to lose an inch off of the bottom of this. This is definitely going to up into here for sure. The whole way around is going to go away because I got to get rid of that pith. That is the, and there's a crack right there to start with. That is already cracked. That is already, this thing would dry, it would start to dry as soon as you cut it. So it does not take long for some of these cracks to appear. And that can be very dangerous to a wood turner. I try and stay away from doing anything that could possibly come off at me. It's just not worth it. There's just too much wood available that's priced right, most of which would be free. So we'll do our swept back grind bowl gouges first. And then we'll move our jig, or I'll just grab the other jig. I might just grab the other jig and be lazy tonight. I want to see whether I switched grinding setups a couple weeks ago. This is the woodcut grinding system now on the right side. And I like the setup on it a little bit. It's a little bit more repeatable than the Wolverine setup. At least I think that's what I feel, because it has this one, instead of the Wolverine, drop it. It has numbers on here on the back. There's literally little teeth on both halves, or a teeth on one half and like a recess on the other. So when you move this, it locks into place, and you're not guessing it at where it's being set at. So that part of it is really quite nice. Although I think I changed something. I've been playing around with it to get it back to the same grind that I was doing with the Wolverine one. So some of these may not have been ground on this one yet. So I'm going to have to remove just a little bit more material than I would necessarily like to, at least on that one. I'm still not quite there. This is also a 350 grit wheel, so it looks like I'm grinding a lot. It's because this thing is taking off so little material at one time. So that's our swept back ones ground. The 40/40 can be ground two ways. Most of the traditional people would say that it has to be ground freehand on the platform and just the wheel. But there's a gentleman down in Florida by the name of Rudy Lopez that showed me several years ago. I took a class from him. He's like, no, you don't have to do that. Let me show you. Let me show you how to do that with the Wolverine jig, and then you won't get frustrated, because the problem with the platforms grinding, it takes a lot of practice to actually get good at it, to grind something like this. So it becomes an issue for me, and that's what I try and tell some people, that make things as easy and repeatable as you can, because you'll just have more fun turning. I mean, you don't want to spend all your time standing here at the grinder, or you come over here and sharpen a tool, which I've actually watched some people on Twitch go over to the grinder, sharpen a tool, come back over, and it won't cut. Then they're back to the grinder 2 minutes later, and it's because they didn't get it ground the way they thought it should be ground. All because they have that philosophy, or they've watched too many of those people to say you can't be a good wood turner unless you know how to sharpen freehand. And as Jimmy Clues would put it, he said, that's bullshit. He said, do it whichever way suits you best and whichever way you get your tools sharpened, quickly, efficiently, and get them done the same way each time. So that's where the grinding jigs, even though they're not necessarily the cheapest thing in the world to purchase, but neither is the tools. So it's one of them things, do you go through umpteen tools doing your work, or you spend a little bit more money and get some sort of a grinding setup. I mean, this is not a cheap hobby. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. A lot of fun, but it's not exactly this thing. Yeah, I won't show it. There's water droplets right here already. That's only about, now we're up to about 600 RPMs. What I'm looking for is the lathe to start shaking, so it's going to shake there at about 650. So we'll back it down a little bit. And we're going to make some cuts. I need my left foot up here. And we're going to cut from the bark down. Must look like my tool rest is moving, but it's not. This becomes a little bit challenging on the first couple cuts because nothing is even remotely round. And I also can't spin it very fast. So your tendency is to try and go too fast. If I go at the right speed, minimal bounce or no bounce. This is also back to the Sorby gouge, so it's not going to stay sharp very long. We'll just make our 1 or 2 cuts here. I'm also tapering this a little bit towards the bottom at this point. I'm not trying to make it totally flat. You can see by the difference in the gap. It's just something that I do. You could certainly go straight across and try and make it straight across. We're not around there. Gotta get rid of that big chunk. We are around there, there. So we just had this one square spot. So now we've known we're going to check our high points again. We're within about 1/8 of an inch, close enough. But our low point, we have wood over here, but we still have bark over here. So now we know we got to move this, actually a fairly good amount, 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch maybe, in that direction. Which when I did that, now this is sticking closer to the tool rest, as you can see, compared to that side. So it's going to take off material here and virtually no material there. But once again, I want this, my natural edge bowls are balanced as best as I can. If they have 3 humps on them, that makes it more challenging to get them balanced. But the more balanced they can be, the more fun it is to make them. Because if they get way out of whack, then you got to turn it at a very slow speed the whole way through the turning process. Just makes it take a little bit longer. And I'm not a production turner, but I also don't want to spend a ton of time doing some of the stuff that would be simpler to do, to take a little bit of time to correct in this fashion. Once again, if I had that on some sort of faceplate, even if I did it, was Mr. Safety about it and took a whatever, a 3-inch or 4-inch Forster bit or something or other and got down through, how am I going to move it to make these wings even? There's just no way of doing it that I know. We're still way off. This is one on that may look. This bark, this log comes up nicely that way and drops off quickly over here. We'll move it one more time. It's going to get us a little closer. It can be off. You could make this the front of the bowl, and as you sit it on the table or whatever, you could see into it a little bit more easily. Once again, a lot of it is personal preference and time spent doing more of it. The more of this you do, the better you would become. So that we will probably say is going to be good enough. We know we're going to take more material out when we start shaping it. We'll check it one more time. Let's go over here to the low point. Now we're close. We're within 1/8 of an inch, 3/16, something like that. It's interesting. It's kind of some bark that's a little bit punky right there. So it may not. These don't always survive. The bark doesn't always survive the drying process. There's probably more times that it doesn't. It's still going to leave you the wavy edge. And I've watched a couple people demonstrate, professional people that make their living turning and demonstrating. And a lot of them say, just take the bark off right off the bat, because its chances of it surviving is slim, for one. And after it survives, somebody's going to pick this up with their thumb and forefingers. If you hand somebody a bowl, they're not going to go like this, they're going to go like this. And when they go like this and pick something up, all the pressure's on the bark and it can snap it right back off. And you spend all that time and effort to keep it on, and the first person that picks it up, it breaks off anyhow. And then you get to look, then you would look stupid. Be like, hey, this thing is no good no more. So we changed things around, slowed it down before I started. We're going to bring up the speed to where we get a vibration, and we'll back off until the vibration goes away. Or at least mostly goes away. And now we'll get rid of the bottom. Left foot forward, right foot back. I'm cutting down in here. It's not over on the side, it's open to about 45 degrees. And we just rock back and forth. It'll cut going forward or back and back. It's a quick cut to get rid of material. Not going to give me a smooth finish by any means. So we're not worried about smoothness right now. We're just worried about getting rid of the material down here. Because we know we got to get rid of the pith. So we got actually quite a bit of material down here. So once it becomes flat, it can actually take a pretty good cut. It probably would make more sense. Oh no, the overhead actually shows that pretty good. But we can go, forget that part. Go over to this, and then you can see it from both angles. And we know, once it stops, the pith is going on that side. We still have another 1/4 of an inch. It even leaves it, you can see right there is the center of the pith. Right there, it left a hole. So we know we'd have a little bit more to get rid of there. Because the problem would be, if I stopped right there and put a tenon on there, now this part of the pith would be in my tenon, which could cause the tenon to fail. And you don't want that. That would be, trust me on that one. It's exciting to have a full piece of a bowl. Even the only one that's ever really come off for me was actually a small one, that there was a cracks that I couldn't see. The tenon stayed in the chuck, the bowl went flying. Most of the turning that I do, most of this kind of stuff, I am out of the line of fire. So if it comes off, it could possibly hit me in the shoulder, but it's not going to hit me in the face. My face is ugly enough already, so I don't need it to become worse yet. As you see, instead of doing the pull cut, as a lot of people would call it, all I was doing is going straight into the side of the tree. Very easy cut to make, and you can see by the size of the shavings that I get off of it that it's very efficient. So it's a matter of getting rid of material. So now we're left with, there's the pith there. There's still a little bit there. So our tenon definitely has to go below all that. I'm going to leave that chunk where it's at for right now. Gives it a little bit more support in here rather than me taking it down to something smaller. Because it is smaller than the tenon's going to be. I'm going to use the same size tenon as I did on the last one. I'm scribing with the left leg and eyeballing to match up the right leg. Do not let the right leg touch. It is another exciting moment. When it touches, it's coming. It'll just pick it up, spin it around, and 9 times out of 10 it's going to be on the floor. And hopefully you're not standing in the road of it when it does it. Because that little puppy right there is kind of sharp on both ends. Because it does get sharpened. So we know where our tenon's at. We're going to get rid of some corner. That Sorby gouge is pretty much dull. So we will go back to our Thompson one. Where's my shorty? There it is. I have another. This can give you an idea of what the difference would be. This one was purchased in September, maybe, of this past year, versus this one's probably a 1.5 or 2 years old. So this is pretty much new, well used. This one is a little bit more challenging to sharpen. These tools are made and hardened the full length of that tool, so it will be used until we get down to where it's so small that I can't hardly sharpen it anymore. Because I do have one. I actually have one I think that's even shorter than that one. Yeah. So when you say, well, that's really getting short, here's another one that's even shorter yet. This is actually the 40-40 grind on that one. This one actually most of the time gets sharpened on the platform because it's really hard to get it in the jig where you need it to be. So this is the one you practice on freehand sharpening. This one does not get used very often because it is so once it's in the handle, it is very, very short. It's one of them scenarios. It's good. It would probably be a good thing if I was trying to teach somebody, because everybody wants to grab a hold of the tool, and I'm like, you'd have to grab a hold of the handle back here to use it, which is fine because the left hand shouldn't be doing any of the work anyhow. The left hand is just there to hold the tool to the tool rest. You're not controlling it with the left hand at all. So once again, now we're better in balance. We can get our speed up. And we're on the power pulley, so if you can hear the motor run, it sounds like it's running 100 miles an hour, but it's not. It'll only spin at about 1250 or 1300 RPMs, something like that, on the power pulley. If you're somebody that's on Instagram or Facebook, Glenn Lucas is a production turner from Ireland. Every once in a while he'll put some videos on there, little short videos of him doing, and he primarily does bowl. He does bowls and platters. It's really his mainstay. Quite interesting to watch, especially when he's in his production mode. I think he said in that one, I watched a couple of his demonstrations during COVID that he was doing some Zoom stuff. And when he does his production runs of the bowls, he does them at about 40 or 50 of them at a time. And of course, the logical question would be, well, how long does it take you to do that? He's like, well, that's a day. He said, it takes me a half a day just to get them all ready. He'll bandsaw them around, puts them in these bins that are sort of sealed so that they don't start checking right away, and then come back the next day or whatever and rough turn them. And he'll literally rough turn all of them on the outside because he has a setup to do that, just like I would here. He has a different setup, and most of his are not. I don't see him doing natural edge stuff very often. So he's starting with a square block. So he has this thing where he drills a hole, about an inch hole or something like that. That has like a plug that comes in, and there's a plate around that has spikes in it. So that's his drive center. He just slides it on there, brings the tailstock up, and I think I counted it one day when I was watching one of them on Instagram that he had on there. He did a bowl, the outside shape of a bowl, that was, I think he said they were 15 or 16-inch salad bowls. 7 cuts from a round blank, and he never makes it round. He just starts cutting. 7 cuts. He had the outside shape done. The 8th and 9th cut were to put the tenon on to grab. But he also has a metal dumpster behind him, which is the funny part. Well, he sets the dumpster in the right place, and he does all this basically left-handed, so that all the chips go into this dumpster, or most of the, I shouldn't say all, a lot of the chips go in the dumpster that's right behind him. That's what you call somebody that has done that for a lot of years. Also means that he saves a whole bunch of time when it comes to cleaning up, because half or 3/4 of the chips are already in the dumpster. I tried it with a garbage can, but I guess I don't have quite the right knack to get them to go in the right place. So we're getting close enough now. We have our tenon marked. Oh, yeah, come on, you rare earth magnet. I have two of them on here, and they like to stick together. Well, I use a wrench for this. The only thing that I have broken on my Laguna lathe is this little handle, which is not the best in the world. I'll leave it at that. If there's one thing I would say to Laguna, use a piece, use some steel instead of some sort of, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, puck metal, shit metal. Parting tool is ground at the dovetail angle. So if I go in square, I'm putting this face against there relatively square, and that should give me a dovetail. Make it a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch deep, more than enough. A deeper tenon doesn't mean it's a stronger tenon. Actually, in some ways, it makes it weaker. Because at this point, at the 1/4 of an inch, or we'll call that closer to 5/16, more than enough to hold. If you make them really, really deep, especially with a dovetail jaw, the further in you go, the smaller the diameter on the very inside becomes. So it doesn't make it stronger like a lot of people may think it does. It's actually sort of doing the opposite for you, making it weaker. So just like the last one, we're going to go in here, we're going to leave some extra material because we know we need a foot. And I've sort of have gone to the foot that's going to be sort of like a bead in here. Because it needs to have some sort of a foot. Otherwise it sits flat on the table. It's just a little bit nicer. And that might be just really just sort of my opinion. Some of the people over the years that I've taken classes with have taught that kind of a thing. That if a bowl sits on the table flat, it doesn't look as nice as the bowl that sits up off the table. That's where I need to switch to the longer one. The longer one I could get the whole way up around there, but this one I'm running out of real estate basically on my fingers. That's a bevel supported cut versus down in here is more of a scraping cut. So this is cut nice and clean. I just need to finish it up at the top. We can come back and we'll take the bottom off of here. Not necessarily too concerned about that down there. If I need to or want to, I can do the shear scraping. The handle is dropped low. I'm using the wing. I'm still cutting in the same direction. I still want to cut in the proper direction from the bottom to the top on the outside of a bowl. That cleaned that right up. Got rid of the tool marks. That's almost, if that was dry wood, that's a sandable finish. Easily sandable finish right there. So we'll just finish up this last little bit up here at the top. And then we'll get to making it a little bit busy. At this point I am getting wet. This has more than enough moisture in it. More than enough water in it. So we just finished off that last little bit at the top. And we probably left a hump right there. I can see it, but once again, I can go back to my hot melt glue stick and say, well, where did we go wrong? I don't think I can get it to show. It probably won't show it far enough. And if I move it over, it just puts it out of focus. There's a hump right there. And that's basically right where I stopped cutting from before. Two ways of addressing it. We can come back here and we can pick our cut up and make another cut. We could also practice our shear scraping. Once again, this is all about practice. I need to move the tool rest over, which doesn't always make sense to people, because the handle has to come down. It's down to where it's almost touching this back part of the tool rest. So I can't have too much stuff in the road. So we can get rid of this hump. Very safe cut. Practice the thing of I'm looking at the horizon, or in this case it's top of the bowl. My eyes are up here, not down at the tool. I'm trying to see, and you'll be able to see the hump disappear. This one I have to move the tool rest more yet, because I'm not able to get it the whole way up around that corner. This would sort of be a little excessive for a green turn bowl. Like I say, practice makes perfect. Definitely going to be cleaning the bedways tonight. It's one of the wonders of working with wet wood is you don't want to do this at a time where you don't have the time when you're done to clean things up. Very gentle. Very little pressure against it. Just let it glide, which becomes an issue when you're working with wet wood too, because the tool rest gets a little gunked up too. But now I can feel it with my fingers. There's actually still a tiny little bit of a hump there, but I'm not really going to chase it. Maybe less than a 32nd of an inch. There's a sign. You say it's a hump there, but it's actually what it is. There's a dip back here. So it's one of them issues of quit screwing around chasing something that you could be here way too long to chase. When it becomes necessity is whenever this thing would be dry and we're ready to finish it. So first order of business, we're going to clean up our tenon. I'm going to go back to my spindle gouge. I'll make one tiny little cut. My spindle gouge will cut this cleaner than the parting tool ever will. And yes, I said spindle gouge. Spindle gouge is going to let me get into that corner in there where a bowl gouge will not. And if you watch any amount of YouTube videos, and watch Richard Raffin from over in Australia, he uses a spindle gouge for the entire outside of a bowl. It's a fairly good size spindle gouge. Not a little 3/8 one like that, but so now we just have a little nub. It's down there. We could leave it. I was thinking that when I cut that actually has the pith running right straight through it. So it's going to break. Like that. I knew it would. I was thinking that when I cut it, I'm like, that sucker could actually break off while it was spinning. Let me grab a chisel and I'll cut that, try and cut that clean without it falling off, hopefully. And then I can mark it. If I don't end up with a mark there, it really doesn't matter. I can mark a center point. And just like when we started, I can manipulate this around to make it so that it's relatively true. Because we're going to have enough material to do what we need to do later. But it stayed where it belongs, so I think. We'll just bring the live center back up, or did it? I don't think it really did. Put a little pressure on it, turn the speed down, and spin it. It moved, because this is pretty considerably out of whack, but it's okay. At this point, we could actually take the rest of it off. It's gonna fall off anyhow. So we'll get our little trusty little mallet, and we'll just take the rest of it off. With the grain, pops right off. It is green wood, so it doesn't. This is very easy. This chisel is fairly sharp. I wouldn't say it's razor sharp, but it's fairly sharp. So that's good enough. Wipe my chisel off, make sure it's not dry, not wet. Put a wet chisel away, we'll have a rusted chisel. They're just plain high-speed steel. It's one of the things with the turning tools, you really don't, I've never really run into those wanting to rust because you're dealing with the wet wood. Probably more the case would be the fact that all the tannic acids that are in the wood would probably have more of an effect on the tools than the moisture that may be there. So get some things out of the road. What's up, Random? It's a black walnut kind of a night. Why did I put it up on there? You'll say that ain't black walnut. My wood guy swears up and down that it is. He tells me that it's the fact of where this tree was growing. As you can see from the bottom, that is the only black or darker color. Black walnut always looks almost like green when it's wet. This will turn dark chocolate brown. The rest of it is totally white. And that's pretty much all the logs that I got from him. And he seems to think that I have more time on my hands than what I do. I brought home, I think there was 10 logs. 10 good-sized logs. Or nice-sized logs. These aren't giant. They were about 16 inches in diameter. It's almost all sapwood. But he says that's because of where they were growing. These are young trees. What was the other reasoning? Young trees, where they were growing. They're not growing in a wooded area, so they're getting lots of sunlight and things like that. He says this black will leach up into about an inch or so into these, and then the rest of it will stay the creamy white color. So we'll see. It's making my bedways not want to slide already. This is number 2 that we've done so far. These are very wet. Don't know when this tree was cut. With him, probably sometime this week would be my guess. Whether the tree was alive or not, I don't know. I'm thinking it sort of might not have been alive because of there's a couple of logs that have the little holes from a woodpecker the whole way around the log. The whole way around that part of the log had woodpeckers are neat whenever they go after trees like that. Obviously, there's some sort of bugs or something that they're looking for in that tree. They make almost a perfectly straight ring around that tree. I mean, to me, it's kind of neat in a way how they operate and do that. So let's go back to our 40-degree gouge for the inside. Spin everything, make sure nothing hits. We slow our speed down. Not in the line of fire. We're going to bring our speed up till we get a vibration. We'll back off just a little bit. And then we'll make our cone shape again, just like we did on the last one. Give myself some room to move. And that's the place to start. I don't use a drill bit. I know a lot of people use a drill bit. To my surprise, watching Richard Raffin on some of his videos, which are very interesting, they're well worth the watch. He does some somewhat questionable things, but when you've done it for whatever 40 years or something like that, maybe more, it's not questionable to him. But he drills a hole. Has a drill bit, not a real big drill bit, probably 3/8, maybe ½ inch. He's in Australia, so I'm sure it's metric, but he has it marked with, I think, a Sharpie. That was one of my, that was a comment that one of these days I'm going to ask him, like, what do you mark that drill bit with? And it shows up on camera, so it's sort of a silver or white. And his philosophy, which has never really been mine, I shouldn't say, I should try it sometime. Maybe I got some really little ones here that we're going to do in a bit. But he has a drill bit, something like that would have some sort of a handle. This is a really long one. But he has markings like every inch, and he'll mark an inch here and maybe a ½ inch somewhere else around there. And he literally just holds it up here and says, okay, that's where the bottom's going to be, that mark. And he drills a hole completely to the bottom of where his bowl is going to be. And he hollows out pretty much all the center before he goes on, which pretty much goes against all the things that I've been taught over the years. But it works for him. Like I say, he does some things that are considerably different than what I do. For one, he uses a scraper a lot. And I don't necessarily use a scraper very much. But I need room to move. And I can't start cutting. I can't start a bowl out here and cut to the middle. I mean, you sort of can, but it makes it more difficult. I see a lot of people on different platforms, social media, maybe some stuff on YouTube where they bring the tailstock up, which is not a bad idea. I mean, there's nothing wrong with bringing this tailstock up, but in this case, how do I do that? I mean, right now, I could bring the tailstock up and put it back in here, but now the tailstock's in my road. So I don't do it that way. I made some room in there. I left the middle in there because when I take that middle out, this is running true. When I relieve the stresses in that center, this is going to move. Some of them more so than others, but it's kind of interesting to watch some of it. Some of them move a lot in a very big hurry. I quit talking and see my measurement. And leave us around 1 inch thick, thereabouts. Like I said earlier, left eye's looking on the outside, right eye's on the inside. I can see the shape develop. I can see that I am pretty consistent wall thickness. You just have to watch when I get down close to where I already cut, right there. It's taking less of a cut. I was only taking half of that cut down to that point. I don't want to run one cut into the other because all of a sudden now I'm making a cut that's 5/8 of an inch wide, which you can have a catch. And a very nice catch to go with it. So I'm going to measure it. I'm using my calipers. They're set a little bit wider than what I really want. So when I come up here, I'm getting onto the wood part because I don't necessarily need to measure the bark. So we got, I don't know, a little better than the 16th maybe. So as I run the curve down around, I want that gap to stay as close to the same as I possibly can get it. And like I say, tonight's a good night. We're doing good. So now if we wanted to, and we don't have to move, we would not have to move this tool rest, because as I come around the bottom of this bowl, my tool is going to be way back here. It's not out here, but in this case, I'm going to actually make some cut going the opposite direction, which it will help me to move that tool rest in there. Stuff's wet, really wet. Tool handle's wet. Look at my hands are going to be black, because that's a good indication it's black walnut. I'm going to turn my hands black. I'll look like I'm a mechanic or something when I'm done. So now I can go back and cut the other direction. And I'm also using the opposite side of the tool now. So that side is nice and sharp. Same deal though, I'm leaving steps. That way I have a place for the tool to go. So I go to the middle, the whole way to the middle, I'm coming back up on the bevel, boom, stop, it drops over that step. I'm ready to cut right back in. I don't need to think about, is my bevel lined up? Because it is. Natural edge, it stays in the natural edge. It's the only problem with doing natural edge. You got all this stuff that stayed there. For a normal flat rim bowl, most of that gets out of the road. So it's just a matter of stopping, go back and pick up my cut. I'm starting to curve towards the center. Take a lighter cut yet. And we're going to stop and measure again. Measuring is free. Do a lot of it. These calipers are not that overly expensive. Don't buy the ones that are really expensive, because as you can see by the looks of this one actually ended up in a bag of wet chips and almost got thrown away. Rusted it completely up. So now we're measured the whole way down into here. So theoretically we should be able to actually make this sort of round already. Our 40-degree gouge does not like going around that corner, so now we're going to switch back to the traditional swept back grind bowl gouge. I also missed a spot. Sharpening on that side. I don't think the camera will actually pick that up. Let me see. This will probably drive the camera crazy if I can do it. If I can find it in the camera. Over here. There it is. Too much light shining on it. There's a little spot. There's a spot right there that you can see I didn't even touch with the grinder. But it doesn't really matter because I'm going to use the left side of the gouge anyhow. But that little spot on that side is definitely is not sharp at all. So now we're going to go back to the middle. And we're going to start making this a curve. This is where you're rowing the boat. The bevel needs to maintain contact the whole way through the cut. Cut through the center. Don't push the center away. You'll tear a chunk out. You can even drop the handle. Start raising the handle when you get to the center so that you can cut across the center. If you get too big of a cut in the center, stop, pick it up behind it. Not break the center point out. At this point, it really wouldn't, it's not going to hurt you. But like I said, practice. Practice doing it right from the start. There is a lot of movement in the handle when you get down to this part. Because we need to maintain bevel support the whole way through the cut. And as you can see, well, you probably really can't see. I'd like to move it. One of these days I'm going to move the camera out if somebody was interested. Move it and make it wider to see the amount of movement there is in the handle in this cut. This bevel would be lined up there. The handle is way over here. Well, it does show it now. Let me show you something. Let me check this first. And then we'll look at something else. Maybe it's something that possibly could help somebody. So we're at our inch thickness down here. We could be we can be thinner down here because of that extra material in there. We're going to see whether we're even. Well, we know we're even, but I have a hump right here where I stopped the cut, I picked up the next cut. So we're going to make another little cut. What I'm going to do is give you an idea on how much movement there really is in the tool. I'll back this out wide because it doesn't do any good to show you up close and personal. So easiest way probably to find that would be to use your fingers. Take your fingers in there. I can take a pencil and mark a line across there. That way you know where what it does. It goes in here straight. There's a tiny little hump, and then it continues on. The rest of it is nice and smooth in there, but there's a hump in the middle. Is it critical seeing as how it's wet wood? No. But once again, practice. It's all about practice. So we're going to find our bevel. We're going to move the handle to the right so we pick up the cut. Now that we have our cut, we're going to make a nice sweeping curve. The handle's coming towards me the whole time. I'm looking over on the right side of the bowl, or the furthest away from me. For one, in this particular case, we have this little guy that decided it would stick to the edge of the tool, so I couldn't really see it anyhow. Then we're going to complete our cut right straight through the middle. We pretty much almost come to a stop in the middle and let that cut off. Because that middle part, that very dead center in there, it's, like I said, it was 900 and some RPMs. It's barely moving. So that gives you an idea of what it takes as far as the handle movement to sweep a curve on the inside of something. Outside is a little bit different. That's soaking wet. Look at all the black comes off of it on your hand. But that's number 2 wet. Nice green wet piece of walnut. So we'll take it off. I'll put my pen away. Just like the last one, we're going to mark it. We're going to put a date on it. And for the most part, I put the exact date on it. Not that that really matters. And we're going to write on it what it is. I try not to get too much wood that I don't know what it is. This came from my 89-year-old that's a retired forester, so if I have a question about some wood, he's my guy. Which I did today. I took a piece along with me. Actually, I think we're just actually still in the truck. Because I was not sure what it was. I actually had it marked as a piece of walnut. But when I cut into it, and I'm like, this has got the biggest, fattest open grain of any piece of walnut I've ever seen. And that led me to believe that it wasn't walnut. And I took it to him and I showed it to him and he's like, no, that's not walnut. That's elm. That's red elm. I'm like, okay. So it is worthwhile to have somebody of his stature to, number one, he gets me a whole bunch of wood. Too much wood, really. What I got from him today is really too much for me to have at one time. These are still in logs. Logs are about 5 feet long. Somewhere thereabouts. Surprisingly enough, a 5-foot long log that's, I don't know, 14, 16 inches in diameter, something like that, is actually easier to maneuver around. And there again, he does this at 89 years old. He's doing that by himself, maybe a little bit of help. But he's like, it's all in technique. He says, don't try and pick, don't be superhero and try and pick the log up like you're some Hercules or something like that. You could pick one end of that log up, stand it up. He leans it up against the bed of his truck, as close to the truck, so it's almost at the halfway point. And you get down to the bottom is still on the ground. Just pick it up and it slides right up in the truck. Same way taking them back out of the truck today. Need a new bag. I got to clean up a little bit. The chips are now at my feet, right up against my cabinet that are about 1.5 feet high. The ones that are behind me are about 1 foot high. It does generate a lot of mess. But it's all in the name of fun. Wood turner's best friend is a giant size dustpan, which I purchased many, many years ago at a woodworking show. Gives you an idea. That's the size of the dustpan. That sucker picks up a lot of chips at one time, which is what we need. Because these are big, fat, curly chips when you're doing the green wood. There's no dust involved. So you don't need dust collection or a dust mask or anything like that when you're turning this stuff, because it's wet. Which is all makes it fun. For me, anyhow. Like I say, not everybody is excited about doing this kind of stuff. A lot of beginning turners are generally too impatient because they want to see the end product. They want to jump on a lathe or whatever and turn something and have a finished piece at the end of their time frame that they have to work on it. I'm not that person. When I go back and once they're dry, then yes, then it's going to be, but once they're dry, I can work on a little bit at a time as well. I don't need to come down here and say, I'm going to spend the next hour and a half or whatever it may take, depending on the size of the bowl, or the size of a bowl. It's generally a bowl. It's done that way. Hollow forms are done the same way. Everything is there when I do a hollow form. I don't really, right now, I don't really have any material really big enough to do a nice size hollow form. So that's good enough for now. So now we can continue on. Because my buddy Martin, which is his name, wanted, see, he told my dad's eyes lit up when we come home. I told him, I said, you know, Martin told me that what was in my truck, because when we got there, he's like, that pile on the ground is your dad's. Because my dad likes to make Christmas ornaments and things like that. Smaller stuff. He just has a small lathe. So he does mainly like the Christmas ornaments and stuff like that. There is probably half a pickup load in my truck. There again, these are all 4 to 5 feet long. This is probably all branches, I would assume. But he told my dad, he says, I want a whole bunch of, he handed him a little bowl that's only about that big. He's like, there's that whole truckload there. He said, make me a whole bunch of them. He said, try and get them done till this fall. So, because he goes to dinners, I think he considers them a dinner. It's a gathering for the Pennsylvania Forestry Association. And he'll get in contact with me generally and some other wood turners. I'm not the only one that he supplies some wood to. And we'll be wanting stuff donated to him to auction off at these things. That branch here is about 4 inches in diameter. Question is it even relatively? It's not totally round by the looks of it. The pith is right there. Let me get my Sharpie. I need the fat Sharpie though. So we'll help my daddy out. We'll make a couple of these little small bowls. So it's 4 inches. But we know we want to get rid of, this is probably primarily going to be all white. It only has the other end is dark because of it doesn't. So what I'm going to try and do, this is sort of round up here. And it gets down to here. This, if I understand from him correctly, this branch would have been on the tree in this fashion, with the pith part being down here. More of the branch grows on the top of the pith versus the bottom of the pith, if that makes sense. It always makes sense to him. So, and at his age and experience of doing this stuff, I kind of have a tendency to take his word for it. So if we cut along the pith, I'll just cut right straight through the pith. I'm going to turn around here and I'm going to cut this on the bandsaw. I'll explain to you how I did it after the fact. There's multiple ways of doing it. The worst way is to sit it on the bandsaw like that and go through. This one I probably could get away with because it is fairly flat over here. But it's not a real good practice to do on a bandsaw because there's not enough material down here to support it. So if it's rocks side to side at all, a bandsaw will get a hold of things like that. You could break a bandsaw blade. There's multitudes of weird things that can go wrong, none of which are pleasant. It is not fun. I can tell you right now, it is not real fun to break a bandsaw blade. They crack like a cannon, for one. I think I've only ever broke one on this bandsaw. But safety first. I will use a cutoff sled to do it. That's the other thing when you're cutting something on the bandsaw that's round. We'll get that out of the road. This is what I will use. It rides in the miter slot of the bandsaw. This is relatively sort of a zero clearance. This log, I'm going to hold it in there on the sled like that. I'm going to roll it around until I can get a nice firm grip. You could even use clamps on this if you wanted to. But if you do this as a round piece, it only touches that little bit out there, and it can actually roll it right straight into the bandsaw, and it grabs. That's one of the places I've ruined a few bandsaw blades because of doing that. Like I say, I'll roll this around to where I can get a place that feels like it's very secure. I'll go straight through this, make a cut. I'll measure that because we know it's about 4 inches. So I'll make this about 4 1/4, 4 1/2 or something like that. We'll make 2 tiny little natural res bowls. We will go to final thickness right from the start. We'll take them down to about 3/8 to 1/4 of an inch thick right from the get-go. Someday I'll move a camera over here and I can show you some of the things that I do on a bandsaw. Bandsaws are very poor when it comes to dust collection, which it wasn't collecting dust earlier. I have a little bit of a makeshift. They do have a dust collection port on them. It's just, it's on the back and down fairly far. So it doesn't do a good job collecting the dust. I actually have an old shop vac hose with a plastic piece of PVC pipe on the end of it that is literally capturing. There's a slot in it. It literally goes around the blade. The shop vac gets turned on, so it sucks all the dirt, or most of the dirt, coming off of the blade. It sucks it up into the shop vac rather than continuing on down, because when it continues down, the wheel is directly below that, and now that wet wood goes in between the wheel and the blade, and it'll stick and gum up the side of the blade. It's still going to gum it up somewhat here, doing this way, but nothing compared to doing it the other way. The other thing, when I cut off the end, I'm looking at this side, not that side. Doesn't matter what that side is. This side, I'm looking for the cracks. Can make it, bend it. This is about a 1/2 inch thick, 3/4 of an inch thick. If there was cracks there, it would still break. So we needed this to be about 4 inches or so. I can put a mark on here, sort of a half mark. I don't need to be exact. Slide it over. Give things a little bit of an eyeball. And now we have our piece. Now we can sit here with our ruler and say, this tree branch is really wacky. So there's our pith over there. I really need to go through the pith. This branch actually may only yield one little bowl because it's very small. How about if I cut it in that direction? Keep moving my ruler around right on the pith and assuming this thing goes relatively straight on the pith. We could possibly get 2 little ones out of there. Pith is still a little bit over there, but that's that would be at the bottom, so I could get rid of it on the bottom, especially since it's offset. I wasn't thinking along those lines, so we should be able to. Like I say, this thing is not very round. So I'm just trying to try to think outside the box a little bit, try and get two pieces out of here. I got enough lines on here and I won't know which line to cut, but that looks like a better line, so I can cut that. I am going to stand this up on the bandsaw just like that. And I can tell you right now, a bandsaw does not like to cut wood in this fashion to where it's cutting with the grain. A bandsaw is really designed to cut across the grain or with the grain long ways, not up and down. This will make cute little curly Q shavings that will gum up things on the bandsaw, whether it's dry wood or wet wood. So we still have plenty of our chunk left. We could, what time is it? That's 8:45. We'll just do these two little ones and let that go. Next week's another week, or tomorrow, whichever. Probably next week. I got things to do tomorrow. See, the bandsaw makes these cute little, almost like turning shavings when you cut in that fashion. So now we have two little itty bitty bowl lengths. So now we need to find somewhat of a center. So it's about 4 1/4 right there. So we're going to call that 2 1/8. 2 1/8 is going to be about center that way. Actually measures a little bit more that direction. Wait a minute. Would be easier. Easier way than eyeballing everything would be to slide it up against the banjo, and then that's a little easier to see when I'm over there. And we're going to call that almost 4 1/2 that way. So 2 1/4 is center. Knock a piece of bark off. So we're 2 1/4 center right on there. We're going to treat this just like it was the big bowl. We're still going to drill a hole. Get down to nice wet wood, or nice wood. Tiny bit of cambium layer left on that one. As you see, I did not cut the I didn't cut the corners off. We don't need to. These are so small that it doesn't matter. We'll turn them off. You can do the same thing on a big bowl if you wanted to. It's just a little bit, can be a little quicker, a little bit easier not to on something of a bigger size. Also make sure you clean the bandsaw table off. Don't leave the wet chips laying on that. It's like everything else. It will rust it fairly quick. I do try and keep all that stuff waxed up so that if you cut something like that and you walk away and don't do it, that you don't come down another day to find out that you made a mess of things. So I really don't need, since they're so small, I really don't need to pound them in. They're going to dig in enough themselves. You could even use a stab center on here if you wanted to. It's not going to take a whole lot of force to drive this. We are going to do the same thing that we did. Try to do the same thing we did on the rest of it. This one's going to be extra challenging because this sort of comes up and curves out. So I know that's going to be that size. Keep my thumb back and just sort of eyeball things. So let's move that a little bit in that direction. We're gonna call that our starting point. We're gonna get rid of our corners. I gotta switch my belts back on the lathe. This is a teeny, like I say, you heard the dimensions. It's only like 4 inches, 4¼ inches, something like that. I'm not going to turn this at 800, 900 RPMs. This is going to be running pretty quick. We're going to make quick, short work of 2 little itty bitty bowls. I'm going to go back and use up some more of my little short bowl gouge while we're at it. I'm going to spin everything by hand. Those corners are fairly close. Everything's tight. Speed down. I'm going to speed up. There probably would be no speed on this lathe that would give me vibration. Actually, I'm getting a tiny bit of vibration. That's also 1600 RPMs right off the bat. So make a nice cut. Get rid of that corner. All the way to the bottom. Now we're getting a lot of overhang on the tool rest, so we're going to stop. We're going to move things in. We're not round yet, but now we know where the corners are at. So we're going to bring the tool rest into there. Once again, I'm out of the line of fire. Cut completely off to the end. Actually looks like I'm sort of tapering it upward rather than inward. We still have bark there. We have no bark there. So we know we need to move that in that direction. To cut more over there than here. How about in that direction? Could actually move that. Here's where it becomes fun. These little ones like this, you can play, learn things, like use the shorter tool rests so that I can get up close and personal, sort of, at least closer. I don't need to be on top of it, but we can certainly bring our tool rest in relatively close, 3/8 to a ½ an inch away. I know I'm going to start from up here and I'm going to remove material down there so it can be closer at that end than the upper end. I'm going to keep making sure things stay tight. So let's see if we did any good. This looks like I moved it the wrong way. Let's bounce it back over that way a little bit. What did we do with the big ones? These little itty bitty bowls are almost more work than a big. Well, there's not almost. These are actually more work than a big bowl. Still should be taking more off of that side. I moved it the wrong way. I think I did. One more cut and we're done. We're gonna call it good enough. So there. Still more over there than over there. Let's go around and straighten up the bottom a little bit. So this is kind of an odd shaped branch to do this with. Really, to make little bowls like this out of branches, I would probably try and get branches that are more round. You bet. It's almost all white. Even the base of the tree only has a small circle of dark wood. These little branches are almost all white. There's actually the base of the tree, snow white in the inside. That's the only dark spot is in the very center. All the rest of it is white. So that's what my guy gave me today. And there is, my wife's not watching, there's probably 50 or 60 feet of log. These logs are all 5 feet long, about 16 inches in diameter, 14 to 16 inches in diameter. Some of them have a fairly good size dark center. He said it come out of 2 different trees. The biggest center on them was probably about that big. The other ones were all about maybe 4 inches, something like that. It's kind of weird, but okay. So let's, like I say, these smaller ones are almost harder than a bigger one because you have such a small area to work with. And the bedways are really gunked up from doing the 2 bigger ones. So we do just like the bigger ones. We're going to not sure why this thing wants to pick up a bit of vibration on this. Probably because the tailstock's out so far. So we'll cut the corner off. It's a young tree. That was the 2. That's what I said to him. I said, why in the world does this thing have so much sapwood in it? He's like, it's a young tree, and part of it is where it's growing at. That it's, how did he put that? A lot more of it was actually where it's a young tree, and it's also where it was grown growing in a place that's really not in a forest kind of a situation. So it's getting lots of sunlight, lots of moisture. And he said that's why it is primarily white, even though it is a black walnut. I'm like, well, that's interesting. But it's going to be probably going to be a little bit of a hard sell at a craft show to tell somebody that this is black walnut and it's Snow White. But it is what it is. Oh, shoot, I got to change jaws. So we got to change our chuck jaws. Or do we? Yeah. Let's take this 2 minutes out. I was working with finials last week, so I have the finial jaw set on, which are very small. I probably could get away with holding on to something like that with these. Let's see what it is when it completes a circle. I think this goes down to about 7/8 of an inch, thereabouts, for a complete circle. About 1 inch. Which I think for me, that's a little bit small for the foot. Also didn't do a very good job cleaning my chuck up the other day. But I was spraying black shellac on those finials, and I kind of got a bunch of that on the chuck and the jaw. I did clean up the jaws. A little bit of denatured alcohol, even after the fact, takes shellac right off. Because these chucks are too expensive to gunk them all up, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, but like I say, they don't. Yeah, I if I'm gonna do black walnut, that's what I want. I don't want a piece of black walnut that's black, or it's not really black, it's brown. I don't really want the piece that's brown from top to bottom. I'd rather have the sapwood along the sap layer. The sap line, I guess you would say, not the layer. Then I think they look really neat. And you can get some really wild. My uncle sold some of that many years ago when we first started turning. And my dad has a couple of the bowls that he made out of it. It almost looked like it had fingers because for whatever reason, the sapwood and the heartwood, which is dark, the dark and the light, had like little fingers of dark going up into the white. It really looked pretty cool. But so he actually called my dad and said, "Hey, would you guys possibly want any of this? Come out." He said, "Because I'm already splitting it because he burns wood." So we only got a couple pieces. It's similar, yeah. Because usually when the normal walnut that I should say normal, but the walnut that I've gotten in the past that would have dark wood, light wood, generally is it's pretty even line, so to speak. I mean, it might have a little bit of curvature to it, but the stuff my uncle sawed up for firewood, it had some really peculiar, I guess you'd say, sections on it where it was not a straight line, not even close to a straight line. It was really wavy. which made it kind of neat, but I don't necessarily do a lot with black walnut. This is probably the most black walnut that I can say that I've ever had, because I normally shy away from it because it doesn't have, black walnut, once it's dry and the dust off of black walnut does not really like me. So when I go back in whatever 8 months to a year from now to finish turning this stuff, the bigger pieces anyhow, I will have to have the dust collector running the entire time, because it just closes me up to beat the band. So that's the size of our tenant. We can probably guess at that. Thought I was close already. I'll raise the tool rest a little bit because my parting tool that I use for this takes a little bit of height. So that, we're going to go out there and we're going to make our tenant about up there. Doesn't necessarily need to be really super wide. I'm making it wider than what it is because I'm going to make this into a rounded bead down here. So the thing I'm more concerned about is that I have the right diameter so that when I put it in the chuck, that the jaws don't dig into, because I can do this bead right now. So this thing will actually be pretty much complete in one go. So now we can finish our shaping. And come right in along that edge of that. Really looks like it's, for a tiny bowl, to me, I have more trouble getting this size bowl to look proportionately correct. Looks like I don't have a curve. I don't have the curve that I would like. We're going to take some more out of the bottom. So that's to me, that's a nicer curve. Now we're going to smooth it up. We don't want to leave a bunch of hunkin' tool marks on there because this is going to get sanded whenever it's dry. And that's all that will get done. My curve is not quite what I need it to be. My curve, what I'm looking at, my curve came up and sort of went straight. So I really want it to be a curve. We'll take a little bit more out in here. Doing all this as a shear scraping cut rather than trying to make a bevel supported cut. It'll take a little bit longer to do it this way. It'll also give me a nice clean surface behind. Still not getting it to where I want it to. And since it's wet, it's fuzzing it up. So the bigger one, this one probably is sharper. So we'll do it that way. So now we have no real fuzzy sticking up. So now we'll switch over to our spindle gouge. And we'll cut back down into there. Drop the handle, make a bead. Bead's a little bit. You know, a little excess material there. Actually made that bead a little bit smaller than what I wanted it to be. A very round bead. There we go. A little better. With the apex of the curve to be in the middle, not towards the top. And we did some tear out there. Primarily because we were cutting in the wrong direction right there with the spindle gouge. But I should be able to basically shear scrape it, shear cut it, back up in the right direction. It still didn't cooperate very well. One of the downfalls of the wetter wood is it doesn't always cooperate in certain places. But we have lots of this to play with, so I'm not really too concerned about it. And walnut is actually pretty soft. Is also one of the reasons it doesn't necessarily want to cut cleanly there for whatever reason. We're going to say that's probably about good enough now. And watching Richard Raffin, he actually talks about being able to sand some of this stuff while it's actually wet. But he's like, the surface will dry off. It's going to clog up sandpaper like crazy though. I just want to make sure that little section down there is going to cooperate. Not that it won't cooperate later. So that's taking care of most of what was fuzzy and standing up. So that's okay. So that's one of them ready. I think we'll just get both of them ready at one time. Or are we just going to do one? And is it 9:15? Yeah, we'll do them both. I think this half of it was actually a little better shaped. See how we did. A little bit off. Not overly well centered, side to side. Not too bad that way. I'll move it just a little bit. Make it nice and tight. I'll drive the drive spur in with the lathe. You can lock the spindle, give it a little wiggle even, tighten it up just a little bit more, and now we're secure. Going to get that relatively close because it's going to disappear in a very big quick hurry. And we got it semi-round. Keyword semi. Bark there, no bark there. So now we know this has got to come this direction a bit. We're still not totally round anyhow. Show it more. A little bit of pith left. Still have to go more that way. Should check that too. Reasonable enough. This little piece actually makes the lathe vibrate when I go doing that. Yeah. This time we'll just cheat a little bit and we'll make a curve start happening, even though I'm really sort of going in the wrong direction. It really doesn't matter at this point. It most likely will give me a very shitty cut down there. Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, it's staying in the green up there. It's still gonna be a little bit off, but we're gonna live with that. This is about what you call the most unround tree branch that you could find. Actually had a flat spot on the one side. So the rest of this branch is probably going to get used for something different. We do have to get rid of the pith though. That's a given. That's got to go away. That's down about there. Stop and check. It's gone. It's gone. That'll work. Let's get us a mark for our tenant. Like I say, we're probably spending more time on these little piss ass balls than I did on the balls that were 8 inches in diameter. Let's try. It's kind of intriguing that Richard Raffin just loves using a spindle gouge like this. Let's make a foot. Makes a nice, really clean, crisp corner down there when you do that, which is kind of nice. As long as it's cutting it really smooth, because these are going to go right from here to final thickness. She's doing the same thing on this one as it did on the other one. There's one place on each side it wants to pick the green up. Not quite sure whether that's because it's wet. Probably primarily because of the wetness of it. Let's try. He loves the scrapers too. I don't think the scraper will do anything to the wet wood, but I might be wrong. It'll probably make it worse. We'll try it though. Doesn't really want to cut it either. Sort of gummy. See how bad that, oh, I can see the fuzz is sticking up. Yeah, it doesn't like that. Didn't think it would. So we'll just sort of give it a shear scrape. Should be able to do it with the spindle gouge too, to do that. See if that got rid of it. Some of. Most of. Most of. Still some on that side, but I think that'll be okay. I think that'll stand out just fine. Once they dry. A little bit more of that foot out to make sure that that's probably at a full circle. I'm going to have to cut that. Probably going to have to cut that little nub off of them. It's going to be my guess. We'll find out here in a very brief second. Yeah. As you can see, the teeth drove in there quite nicely. This is not going to, now we're going to have to take that. We're going to have to take that knob off. If I can get my chisel. Yeah, we use the chisel. And put it up against there. Get my trusty little whacker. Not take it all in one shot. It should be good enough. Just enough that it's not going to hit it. So we might as well keep that handy because the other one probably has the same nub on it. Now back to our standard. This is a standard jaws for the VM100. If I did things right, it could be a shade bit big right there. I'm not gonna use two hands for sure. It's more than enough of a grip to do that work. Hey. Really has the general area right where that bowl was at, those other two bowls, it's really gotten it yucky. Matter of fact, while I'm at it, and that's not in there, it's over here. Where we? Here's my little wax stick. Chapstick for lathe. This is wax. So we'll just run a couple lines across there. It'll help it right now. It needs cleaned. Clean it with some alcohol or something or other. That'll make it slide somewhat, anyhow. Make it a little less irritating. What I should have done was wax it before I started. A little too close. Okay, so now do I have? I think I do. Yeah, we can go strictly on the end, I think. Come in from there. Move it down a bit. You'll be able to strictly see what we're doing on the inside, I think. Spindle gouge we don't use on the inside. He gets away with using it on the outside, which I can understand, but the inside you cannot. It would be hazardous. See if we have enough cutting edge left on these, which we should. Slow the speed down. Bring it up and let it rock and roll. They're in balance, so I could turn this at basically whatever speed I wanted to turn it at. And stop and look at it. It's getting fairly thin. We're 3/16 maybe on the bark. Something like that. That's about where I was thinking I would be, 1/4 inch area. Yeah, that's about 1/4 of an inch. So just try and make it, I'm not going to measure these. And these will distort as they dry, which is kind of the beauty of them in a way. Gives it more of an organic look, I guess you would say. Some people might say. So that's why. I'm going to say I saw lines develop as I was cutting down through there. And the reason being, this is my shorter one of the bunch. This one does not have the heel removed at all on it versus that one. So the back of that heel is rubbing back here hard and sort of creating like depressions in the wood, crush marks, basically. So switch to the other one, get our pencil. We go into the center, close one eye and look at it. We still can go down a little bit more. These both could use a touch up. We'll come back up here, not quite to the bottom. Come on. Wants to stick fast to it. The very bottom is the only place I don't want that to impede what I see. Because there's nothing on the other side for me to see, or even to look at. If I leave a little tip sticking up down there, that's fine. I'd rather leave that tiny little nub sticking up than a divot down there. Other than that, we have a hump right there. Here's where it becomes questionable whether I can go back after that hump. I think I can, as long as I'm gentle. So it feels consistent, but there was where I stopped and started right there. I left a little bit of a hump. So in order to find it, we'll just put our tool right there about where we need to be to start with. It's also some where one could have I do have a 3/8 inch bowl gouge, but it actually has the 40 degree grind on it. So now that feels pretty good. So that's one. Let's see if I can see any. Yeah, I did put crush marks on it because it could have been a little bit smaller. Because if this is a true circle, and I think the other one will be, but yeah, I'm showing you overhead. That doesn't make sense. You can see a dark mark there, a dark mark there. They're little crush marks on it, but that's not really too concerned about it because I'm going to have to go back and sand all this stuff once they dry. These will dry in a matter of a couple weeks. I probably still will put them in a paper bag. Maybe. Didn't hit the floor. Good. Or I'll just leave them sit here. Make the dehumidifier work all that much more. There is a dehumidifier right outside my shop door here in the basement. I did leave some marks up there too. they're kind of, you know, like I say, it's a little piece of limb wood, so if it doesn't cooperate, and it's not like you lost much, just good practice, good fun, or whatever to turn something. Like I say, they actually, to me, the smaller they are, the actually harder they are to get a good shape out of them. And it's probably, it's probably enough already. I just don't want it to bottom out. It can't bottom out or it won't grip it. That's good enough. Only 8 more. Not tonight. 8 more. Let me tell you what, the amount of this size logs are in the back of my truck, there's probably 50 or 60 more to go. And they're all yours. Because that's what Martin said. That's your dad's wood there. I'm just helping you out a little bit. I'm going to slide over here and sharpen this gouge real quick. The other thing that I did to it, which may or may not make sense to some people, that's the amount of heel that I took away from it this time. So now our cutting bevel is only about 1/8 of an inch long. Maybe just a shade bit more than 1/8 of an inch. So it's going to allow me to go inside that curve much, much easier. So we'll bring it back up to speed. Much sweeter. I was being lazy and not taking the time to go sharpen. Close the flute. You can't pick up the cut with the flute open. It doesn't work so well. I think that tool rest, for some reason, that one seems to be a bit high. Not used to, this is a good thing to do with this small stuff too, is to check some of your heights on the tool rest, because I do have a stop collar on this one. So we're about the same as the other one, about 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little fatter on the quarter on that one. Certainly close enough. These are small enough that you may or may not have heard that there was a little chatter. That was actually the tool, the back end of the tool was hitting the rim. all the chips stay in there. I can't see what I'm doing. So it feels like we're fattening up a little bit down there. We're getting close to the bottom. We just need to make it a little bit thinner, a little bit better curve on the bottom. Even though it's small, I still don't want it to be flat. I want it to be a continuous curve. It would be nice if it didn't collect the chips right there, but left a little bit of a ring in the bottom, I think. Looks like. Where you whack your fingers on the tool rest, just getting the chips out of the road. And left a line up there though. Still feels like we're a little fat down there. At least by my fat little fingers. But there's a definite line, and that's a tool mark line. It runs the whole way around. So I'm going to come back. This is where you can get in trouble. But these are so small, it's going to allow me to do that. If this was a 10-inch bowl or something like that, 8 or 10 inches, and I went that thin up there, I could not go back up here and cut anymore. But since these are so small, when these are so small like this, it'll let you just do just about anything to them. Of course, you can blow them up too. And it's also very soft. It sort of what it wants to do. Left a little nub in the very bottom. That's okay. That will sand that nub sticking up will sand off one little swipe. These will actually get, hopefully, these will actually get power sanded on the inside, which you'll see in a couple weeks. We'll finish some more of these up in a couple weeks. So I'm happy with that. It feels pretty consistent. You can see no, you can't see the water because it's on the top. Let's take it out of here and show you. The chuck jaws are less than 1/8 of an inch apart. So this should have left very, very minimal. It really left no compression marks on here. There's a tiny little black line on there. But once they're dry and I sand that, all that'll go away really very easily. There's our little, what did we end up with? We started out at about 4. We ended up about 3 3/8 to the outside of the bark. Like I say, a piece of limwood. Good practice. Really good practice. Like I say, it's harder to get a good shape, I think, in a smaller arena than it is the bigger one. It's a whole lot easier to make 12 or 14-inch bowls than it is the little 4-inch ones. Other than that, I think we're going to call it a night. I do have to clean some of this mess up a little bit. Definitely got to clean the bedways up. Can't let that go overnight. We'll have more work to do. Put some tools away first. Don't want to leave them laying in wet chips overnight. The wet chips on top of the cabinet behind here doesn't really, I never had any issues with that. with the bed and that will cause some problems. Nothing, a little elbow grease, a little bit of denatured alcohol, and we could go back to overhead so you could actually see something. Little spray bottle has the alcohol in it. Get rid of the chuck. It needs clean too because of spraying that shellac last weekend. I don't quite have that finial done, but you can see the black. Gotta just leave that sit there. Like I said, the alcohol will cut that right back off too, even though it's dry. So we'll get it nice and wet. Scotch-Brite pad. It'll take the black gunky stuff right off, usually. This bed's starting to get enough scratches in it right here that from the banjo that some of this stuff is actually sticks down in those scratches. Denatured alcohol is pretty much a universal solvent. There's not a whole lot out there that it won't cut. As you can see, it's lovely black. And open the towels up and put them over the side of the garbage can. Don't roll them up in a ball and throw them in your garbage can. Not a good idea. True denatured alcohol is very flammable. Didn't quite get it all off over there. I wipe the bottom of the banjo off as best as I can. You can do it on both sides. If I was more energetic, I'd take it off. But I'm not that energetic tonight. But the amount of gunk that come off of the bottom of that is phenomenal. So that's the cleaning part. Oh, I could have did the chuck, but I'm not going to do that either. That away. Go back to our Plain Magic is what this stuff is called. It's from, shit, what's the name of this company? Pitas? Yeah. Pita's True Grit. They also have an abrasive paste. This is a wax for doing metal surfaces. I thought it was really kind of neat that it comes in like a big chapstick tube. Makes it pretty easy to use. It wasn't very expensive. I think when I bought it, he had some free shipping or something to go with it at that time. It's a small-time guy that makes it. I'm one of them kind of people that if I can buy something from somebody that's small-time, doing making stuff or whatever, I'm going to do it. As you can see, it's going to pull even more of the dirt off of it too. Literally turn the paper towel black. So rub it in good. Get as much of it back off. Get all the excess back off. It's still taking more dirt off yet, which is what we're looking to do. Use the same stuff on my joiner, table saw, both of them. They're a little bit harder to do than the lathe bed. More surface area, and it doesn't necessarily last as long on those two particular things. For one, like the joiner gluing up panels and things like that, there's quite a few miles of wood that's going to transfer over that, some of which would have the sawmill cut edge to start with. Try and do the inside edge as well a little bit. And that's it. That's all there is to cleaning it up. Not really overly difficult. Slides like nobody's business. I do want to brush this off though. You let it on there and dry, and it dries. Then it really becomes like caked on. Can even wax the bottom of the banjo too, a little bit. I try not to put too much. I think I have already, but you get enough wax on the bottom of the banjo, then it doesn't want to grip. That's it. That's all the more that I need to clean up. The chips laying in behind here won't hurt anything. Can knock the rest of these down. They're not up against anything metal. This is a piece of melamine. On top of this, there's a cabinet right directly below here that all the stuff stays in. But that's it. Fort Pitt. Beer 30. Anybody have any questions, comments? See if we can find somebody else on tonight. There hasn't been people on Sunday night for some reason. See if there's anybody. Man. Nobody that I follow. Shenanigans, you should jump on really quick and I'll send you these good people over, and I am not really smart enough to open. Wait, gotta go over to that one. No, like I say, I don't. That's weird. That's 2 weeks in a row. That nobody is partaking on Sunday evenings anymore. Huh, okay. Well, thanks for coming and hanging out. This is actually being broadcast on YouTube as well under Kapps Kreations, which stays there. If there's something that I did this evening that interests you that you would want to go back and watch again, please feel free to go over there. If you go over there, it'd be nice if you could hit the subscribe button to help the channel grow, but if not, don't worry about it. Generally here on Sunday evenings. I might try and do some stuff in the future on Mondays because now my days off are Sunday and Monday. I'm now working Tuesday through Saturday. You too, buddy. Other than that, you all have a good week. good evening, good week.